Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the PLO Lumumba Foundation Africa Mentorship Program Knowledge Empowerment Series, Episode 4. Today, we are going to have Brenda Mwangi, who will be talking on the topic, humanitarian law, economic and political rights. As usual, she will present and then you will be given time to post your questions. We have somebody on YouTube and Facebook who will bring all your questions. So those of you who are not fortunate to be with us together in the Zoom, no problem. Just post your questions and our trainer today, Ms. Brenda, we answer your questions. Thank you very much. Without much ado, Ms. Brenda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Brenda Wanjiru. I'm from Kenya. I'm currently at the Kenya School of Law, undertaking my advocates training program, and I'm also part of the PLO Foundation. For today's lesson, because it is human rights, it is very broad. So I would just like to start with the basics, and then from then on, for every question, now we can go into detail. So as a start, I would just like to say that when it comes to human rights law and humanitarian law, the background is usually rights pertaining to human beings in any and every aspect. Now, usually human rights are divided into two. They're the classical rights and then the, so to say, buyable rights, purchasable rights. Now, the classical rights is what that we constitute further on as political, economic, social rights, and whatnot. And they include right to life, right to good education, positive environment, things like that. And then there are purchasable rights, which are only accessed in accordance to your status in the society. So, for example, intellectual property rights are a very good example. These rights are given to persons who are maybe in the arts inventory field. So, for example, when I speak of IP rights being purchasable rights, I can start with musicians, authors. So those rights are only given to them because they are of that class of the society. They're in the arts, and they want to protect their intellectual property, their inventions, and things like that. In Africa, human rights is a really huge issue. One, because it is rarely discussed in detail. And if it is actually discussed, it is discussed with a lot of filters. When it comes to legislation, if I may start with the constitutive chart of the AU, it is actually known as the main legislation, so to say, the African Constitution, because it was the first among the first legislation that was written just at the height of independence, that gives you at least a look into what the current leaders at that time wanted and what they had hoped for in future. Now, if you look at the determination in the constitutive Charter of Africa, they state that it is our job to actually protect the human rights of our people in the continent. And now this was further broken down with other legislation that came in later on. For example, the most famous charter, and that is the Banjul Charter, that actually gives out all rights. So when it comes to now this charters and in specificity, the Banjul Charter, all AU member states subscribe to the Banjul Charter. So right to life, good education, good and healthy environment, right to health and sanitation, all African states subscribe to that. Now the problem usually comes in implementation. And before I move on to the other charters and various treaties, just as an example of implementation of the Banjul Charter, one thing we need to realize when it comes to human rights, and that is with regards to all this, the various activism that we've seen. So, for example, PLWDs, internally displaced people, gender. Just as my international law lecturers would say, they only come in because this human rights have not been achieved equitably. For those who may not understand, there is a very huge difference between equity and equity and equality. So equality is only like half-half, quarter-quarter, just equal. Everything is given the exact same share. Whereas equity is on what fits the current situation. So for example, just to give the difference between equality and equity, if, for example, the African Union were to go on an infrastructure spree and was to build schools all over Africa, top-notch schools, good classes, good sitting, desks and chairs, great teachers, offer water in regards to health and sanitation. If they provide for all that, have they achieved the right to education and the right to health and sanitation? Yes, they have. But then if they come and say that the schools will only be for boys or will only be for people in the southern part of Africa, then that brings in the question of equity. Because yes, they have achieved the specific human right with regards to right of education and health and sanitation, but it's not being given equitably. And so you only have a class of people who are actually enjoying this rights. So when it comes to activism and human rights, we must always question the issue of equity and not equality. Okay, going back to the various legislation, that is protocols, treaties, and whatnot, I had started with the Banjul Charter. Now, since the Banjul Charter is the main human rights charter in Africa, there are various protocols and treaties that came after it. So, for example, the Protocol to the Rights of Women, we have the Kampala Convention on IDPs. We have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child that gives out the various rights, duties, responsibilities when it comes to children. We have the African Youth Charter with special regards to Article 11 of the African Youth Charter that actually provides the duties of states in achieving these rights that pertain to the youth. And then we have the African Rehabilitation Institute, which is actually in charge of PLWDs. Now, one thing, if we actually look at the Banjul Charter and its protocols, one of the major things that we miss is a very huge and important right in actually achieving all of this, and that is mental health right. We rarely discuss that. I don't think we actually have concrete acts, so to say, legislation, even though Nigeria has actually started that. It is quite important to have that because one thing that you must realize when it comes to achieving human rights is that these rights cannot be achieved if one is not in a positive mental state. This was also discussed by the Pan-African Parliament, I think 2 to 3 weeks ago. They had a session on the role of youth when it comes to silencing the guns. And there was the issue of achieving silencing these guns physically, but then the silencing of these guns physically cannot be done if it is not done mentally. That is one other thing that we should also consider, the mental health. Just to move from, I think that has explained classical rights. So going into purchasable rights, I started with intellectual property rights. Now, in Africa, one of the fields that we need to heavily invest in, that is also part of education, is the intellectual property sector. Now, we must also give kudos to ARIPO, that is in charge of intellectual property rights, for actually trying to start this civic education on intellectual property. Now, this is quite important because in the past years, or rather since time immemorial, we have seen a lot of intellectual property from Africa being stolen, and being reused in other continents and then being brought back to us. If I can give a few examples, we have the artifacts from Benin that were stolen prior to and during colonization that are actually in the European museums. We have the Masai Shuka, part of what is behind me, that is actually that has been registered under the European Union, and we have our own medicine. If I may give the example of universities I think in China or in Europe, subject to be confirmed, that are actually teaching our humanity, our medicinal, giving our medicinal information to them and then selling it back to us. Now, why intellectual property is important is because it usually protects art, culture, and heritage. Now, if we look at the Cultural Charter and the African Renaissance Charter, it states in its preface that our culture is very important to us. Now, even though we have the right to actually information when it comes to this, our culture, we also have a duty, to protect them and ensure that the future generations actually access this information, and it is protected for that specific reason. Now, under purchasable rights, we must realize that most purchasable rights also heavily rely on duties. So if I may use the sports charter, the African sports charter, indeed you have the right. So for example, if it is in the field of rugby and football, indeed you have the right to have good stadiums, buses, and equal opportunities to harness this this ability that you have. But there is also the duty that is to you and to the government to ensure that, one, as your duty as a citizen is to ask for it, and to ask for it in a good way, and as a government also the duty for you to provide this to your citizens in the realization of human rights. And that is why we have legislation such as the African Charter on Values and Principles of Public Service and Administration. Now, if you look at this specific charter, which includes also the African Charter on Democracy and Governance, African Charter on Values and Principle of Decentralization and Local Governance, as much as it actually provides economic rights and also purchasable rights such as intellectual property, there are also duties that are stipulated in this, which need the cooperation of the state and the people. And so just to finish this first part, for us to achieve human rights, that is in specificity, or in when it comes to providing civic education, we must realize that this cannot be done if we do not cooperate. Yes. Thank you. Right. I think I can finish from the first part, and then we can wait for if there are questions from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brenda, for this presentation. So far, is there any question, please? Has anybody got a question? PK? PK? PK Kasserine, do you have any question from YouTube and Facebook? Okay, Brenda, maybe it seems there's no question at this moment.
Okay. Okay.
So you may continue with your presentation while people try to put their questions or formulate their questions before the end of the class. Okay. So you can continue. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the first part we learned about the various legislation and the types of human rights. Now I'd like to move into achieving this human rights. Now, when it comes to the achievement of human rights, as I had stated earlier, it needs the cooperation of both the state and the citizens themselves. Now, if you do look at the various commentaries that have been done on Africa when it comes to humanitarian law, there's usually that, so to say in quotes, knowledge gap. We have the state that probably has all this knowledge that is not giving it out to the citizens, or we have the state that actually does not know the situation when it comes to those specific rights, and thus the citizens do not also have an opportunity to learn. If I may use economic rights. So when it comes to economic rights, if I may move to trade, rights when it comes to trade. So for example, with economic rights, we have the various charters on agriculture and how to trade and things like that. And we have the constitution, so to say in quotes, the constitution of trade, which is the African Free Trade Agreement. Now, the Africa Free Trade Agreement, so to say, is to come in and ensure that when it comes to trading, Africans have a fair, a level playing field, and also as citizens, you're able to actually access all this trading materials or products, so to say, in the continent without the actual hustle. Now, in achieving this trade rights, we need to ask ourselves, first of all, the persons who drafted this continental agreement, are they sitting down with the people and giving them providing civic education on this? If yes, have the citizens understood, and are they able to now bring this into life? If no on both answers, then we have a problem. If I may give an example of West Africa, the African Development Bank has currently been giving, I think for the last 2 to 4 months, has been providing sessions to various youth in agriculture, for example, how to turn agriculture into agricultural business, how to reproduce products, or rather bring value to your specific products, how to protect yourself, how to trade when it comes to, for example, customs, when it comes to trade barriers and trade remedies such as anti-dumping, But now the question is, in as much as they're giving us, do we understand? Are we willing to learn about this trade secrets? If yes on both, is the state now willing to partner with the citizens to achieve this? There is the charter on psychosanitary, subject to be confirmed, but that deals with such trade barriers, anti-dumping, protection of local trade, from invasion or things like that. Um, are the states actually bringing this to life? Because you look at the farmer has a right to be protected by the state, from anti-dumping, because what anti-dumping does, just to give a brief description on international trade law. What anti-dumping does is it protects the local market from, so to say, financial crash. Anti-dumping materials usually come into the state at a way lower price than what is actually in the market. Now, as a farmer, one, you have the right to be protected from the state, and this is why we have trade barriers for that reason. And two, as the consumer, you have the right to be protected from harmful goods. And this is why, for example, we have Bureau of Statistics. Depending on your state, their job when it comes to consumer protection rights, their job is to ensure, is this specific product fit for the market? Now, again, just to repeat that, we cannot achieve this rights if we do not work as a partnership. And just to expound on that, as Africans, in achieving our own human rights, the various human rights given, and to create a positive environment, we must also admit that maybe we do not know, so that we know where to start from. And two, we must also move away from the blame game, which is usually something that we commonly see. And why this is so is because if we are able to sit down and realize, this is where the problem starts, then we can be able to learn how to, so to say, mitigate the problem. A very good example, if just as I had stated earlier, is the heavy um, looking for the right word, but education. I'm trying to figure out how to put in the correct word. But if we heavily invest in education, a lot of these problems will be solved. But then again, in solving these problems through education, we must also realize that most of the things we call problems are actually reactions to problems. You know, we sit during this session, we sit here and say human rights are not being achieved in Africa, you know, but that is a reaction. That is not a problem. The problem is we don't know a lot of our human rights. Why don't we know about our human rights? It is also a reaction to the poor education that is being provided. You know, poor education, the rights to education which are not being achieved is also a reaction to poor infrastructure. Poor infrastructure is also a reaction to maybe poor leadership. So we must, in everything that we call a problem, we must look at it. Is it a reaction to a problem, and what is the root of that problem? Yeah, I think I can stop there for the second session.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody with a question? Yeah. Okay. If I think Brenda,
Yes.
what can you do in case your human rights is trampled by the government, and then you have taken the government to court in the country, and justice is either delayed or maybe some kind of intrigue is going on with the matter? What can you do as an individual or groups of individuals?
Okay. I think I will not answer your question for now because the third part is actually on political rights. So I will deal with that in specific.
Later.
Yes.
Okay. No
It's in
problem.
the
I'll
third
wait.
part, political rights.
I'll wait.
Yes.
I'll wait. Yeah.
Yes.
Then when it comes to the economic rights, just now you talk about anti-dumping.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a situation where we see a lot of foreign goods being let into the country, but then on the other hand, local production cannot meet demands. How do you think the government, how can we hold the government responsible for not making sure that local production is, the local production can meet demand, and then also letting in foreign goods into the country? How do we manage this situation?
Okay, it touches on everything. The first thing that we and we have done it here at home, if I may use that example, is the first question we need to ask when it comes to that is where actually did the rain start beating us, you know? Because with the situation of anti-dumping, you know, one we must ask ourselves, like, why are these products being dumped here? You know, for some countries I have seen it is one, the poor treaties were not actually read and understood, you know, so that brings in the problem of your legal institutions, you know, are they not advising you enough, you know? Two, I usually hesitate blaming governments these days because if you actually realize the meaning of the government, it is usually for the people, by the people, and of the people, which means we are the government. So, but I understand. But I understand you want to blame those people representing us in the global sphere. So if it is blaming those guys in the global sphere, again, we ask ourselves that first part. One, isn't the legal fraternity advising you well? And two, as the citizens, do you understand the so-called calls for treaty? With the anti-dumping, it usually comes under international trade law, and the rules for when it comes to international trade law is usually there's the call. So if it is between, let's say, trade Ghana and Kenya for chocolates, you know, so they'll usually give the call, okay, we would like to hear what you have to say when it comes to this trade. And usually it is made public. That is one thing. So when it is made public, as a citizen, are you participating? because it is in this public forums that you get to learn, okay, so this is what they want to do, and this is how it will affect us. If we do not participate in that, then when the problem becomes big, we cannot blame them because we did not act, you know. Then there's the third part, again, bordering on political rights. Have you chosen the right people? You know, in choosing the right people, let's say you have not, do you understand your redress? You can take them to court, because if depending on your states, the political charters, in quotes, the political charters that I have read to you, for example, the African Charter on Values and Principles of Public Service, one of those values is integrity. Now, how many understand that you can actually hold your political leaders to that? They're not good people. Okay, they're doing this against us. Okay, do we know that we can take them to court? You know, if we take them to court, do we know why we're taking them to court? If we know why we're taking them to court, do you know the remedies that we're going to ask from the court? Do you want them to actually leave office? Do you want them to say no? Do you want to ask Ghana in this case to give you back your money? You know, um, just in short, we cannot solve a problem without looking at its background. I think we can do that. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anybody with any other question, please? Okay. Brenda?
Yes.
Do Africa have a mechanism within the continent to handle trade issues, or the issues, say, between Nigeria and Cameroon must go to the WTO?
Complex question, complex answers. If I may just give the background of, so the base answer is, what do you want? Let me just start from there. The base answer is, what do you want? So to say, we do have mechanisms, but are not as strong, because usually when it comes to every treaty, or let me just say, when it comes to every contract, usually have your own specific clauses. So for example, when it comes to mitigating the various issues that you may have, you may choose to actually when it comes to dispute resolution, you have the option of choosing the alternative dispute resolution. That is, for example, conciliation, mediation. You have the option of choosing the specific laws of that state. So for example, if it is between Nigeria and Sierra Leone, you may choose to, depending on where it was signed, you may choose to use Nigerian laws, you may choose to use ECOWAS laws, you may choose to use the African Union Human Rights Court, but that only limits you to human rights, you know. But then the issue is usually we don't believe in ourselves. And so we, yes, we may blame colonialism, but then after we've blamed colonialism, now what are we going to do? Are you still going to run to the WHO? The WTO, sorry. The WTO rules on mediation and whatnot are usually just guidelines. But as member states, because you have the right to, I keep forgetting the word, but yes, but because you have the right to state sovereignty, it means that as a country, you will be given priority. So if Sierra Leone and Nigeria are arguing, they do not know how to solve, they don't have to go to the WHO, the WTO. If they refuse, they have the right to state sovereignty, which protects them. So they may choose to actually deal with it on their own. They may choose to go through the ECOWAS Court of Justice or the AU. The background, the base answer always remains, what do you want to do? Because we have, yes, they're not, the mechanisms are not strong, which actually gives us the opportunity to change that to fit our needs. But as Africa, do you want to do that? You know? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have to support our own institutions. But then, if you think that you cannot find justice via such institution, you may have to can I just skip if say Nigeria and Sierra Leone are having an issue? Can they just move to WTO, or they must pass through something, say ECOWAS, to AU before moving to WTO?
No, the option is yours, because when you're drafting the contract, you're the ones who stipulates the clauses of the contract. So you may have in the contract that say, if we argue, we'll go straight to the WTO. The contract is on your terms. That's what people don't realize. But as is with every contract, in law, we're usually told the best contracts are the ones that give you a way out. So in as much as you have said that you go to the WTO, maybe one party will feel you have a lot of influence in the WTO, so they will come back and say, we're going to use our own laws. It usually depends on what you have stipulated in your contract. Yes. And how you can use it to your advantage.
Okay, good. So yes. If you were given an opportunity to talk to the African leaders, what would be your suggestion when it comes to resolving trade issues?
Can we just try our own institutions? No, because in my experience, and using the internet also, Nigeria is actually the best example of this. You look at Britain, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. The best doctors are from Nigeria, but then Nigeria does not have good doctors, you know. So when it comes to solving that situation, you need to first ask ourselves, why don't they want to come home and, you know, build the state? And they'll come back to you and say, well, you're not giving us the opportunity to actually achieve what we want to achieve. When it comes to our leaders, the question is, why are you afraid of giving us the opportunity? Yeah, that's just it.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there anybody with a question, please?
They must exhaust local remedies. I think I have gotten a statement from the chat. Mostly, okay. They must exhaust all the local remedies before going to the international level. Yes, Ms. Monica, it is true. Unfortunately, that does not happen in real life. I'm not sure why. They don't really. They tend not to believe in themselves. If I may state that, we're usually afraid to give ourselves that opportunity to try. Yes.
Say, for example, Kenya and say Tanzania had a contract, and then they decided in the contract they talk about resolving issues using the WTO.
Yes.
Okay. Can the population who are like the employers of the government force the government to resolve the issue using maybe an East African court or African court?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It depends on how you play your cards. Usually on paper and legally, as the citizens, yes, you have that right to call them back, so to say, to call them back and question them. It is usually on the basis of questioning them, and not really because you're not privy to the contract. If it was not public, then you're not privy to the contract. If they did put it public, then we first start over. If you're not privy to the contract. Now, if you're not privy to the contract, then you can call on them like, we don't know the context of this. Why are you going to the WTO and you have not told us what is in this contract? So in that aspect, you will call them like, we want to know what's in that contract. then we want to solve the issues in that contract. If we do not solve that issue, then you have the option of going to the WTO. Now, if you are privy, you will only call onto them and say, why haven't you tried local mechanisms? Because this is an issue between two EAC member states. Why haven't you gone to the EAC? On the part of no, it is just what happens in practice. Just again to repeat, I am not sure why they don't have confidence in our institutions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I got the question here from, I think maybe it's from Facebook or YouTube. And I don't know, to my understanding, maybe it is a political right kind of questions, or,
Okay.
but I will just ask it and you decide either to answer it now or
Okay.
to respond to it later. Okay. Has the present existing law of international armed conflict been really effective in mitigating the sufferings caused by war, especially in Somalia?
Pardon, can we repeat the question?
Okay. Has the present or existing law of international armed conflict been really effective in mitigating the sufferings caused by war, especially in Somalia?
With a specific convention, I will not touch on it because I do not want to mislead the audience. But if I may use the answer of silencing the guns to answer that question on Somalia. Also, I will not touch on it because it is an issue that's ongoing, but just to give a rundown on it. When it comes to solving issues in a different state, there are various doctrines that you can use, subject also to be confirmed.
Sorry, we can hear you.
Yes.
We can hear you, sorry.
I can continue?
Yeah, we can hear you.
There are various...
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, now I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There are various international law doctrines that have been used. I think I can likely mention the Bush doctrine when it came to the invasion of Iraq. So just as a rundown, as a state, usually when it comes to solving another state's issues, you do have the right to go into that state. One, to protect the citizens of that state, and two, to protect your interest in that state. I think I'm not sure, but it's a member of ECOWAS that actually did that to the Rohingya issue. Now, when it comes to Somalia, we must ask ourselves, what is the root cause of that war, first of all? Because if you look at the various African Union representatives, they usually diplomatically decline to have neighbors solve their own problems. Because as neighbors, you have history, and going in to solve your own neighbors' problems might work against you, which might ruin relations, which might cause you to look for other parties to help you solve the situation, and then it becomes a yes versus no situation. On the issue of arms, again, I would not like to touch on that specific convention because I do not want to mislead you. On the issue of arms, you also need to do a background check. Why are they there? Because when it comes to arms dealing, someone must have let those arms come in. Someone must have known those arms are coming in. Someone must have purchased those arms and let them come in. And so, in light of solving that situation, what problem are you solving? One, you may want to go ahead and, with the issue of Somalia, for example, there's the political situation, there's the fishing rights situation, there's a border situation. What problem do you want to solve? Violence is not the answer, one. And two, what about the aftermath of that? Solving of the situation, we know internationally, this is a very complex question. I'm trying to answer it in the best way. Internationally, the whole arms issue has been looked at with the side eye, but then on the ground, things are different. People are doing things the way they want to. you know. And so even if we say that we want to solve the situation in Somalia, one, what problem are we solving? Two, how are we going to solve the situation? And three, what is the aftermath of that problem solving? I'm not sure I've answered the question. I know I've left out a lot of things. But it is a tricky question. I cannot honestly answer it to its fullest.
Okay, no
Yes.
problem. I hope the comrade who asked the question will
Yes.
we ask if he or she didn't understand, okay,
Yes.
or didn't
Hopefully.
or think that maybe was not fully answered. Then
Yes.
if the question is repeated or certain aspects of the question, then I'll post it back to you. Okay, so
Yes,
maybe you conclude your presentation before we get back to questions.
thank you. You had a question on political rights. Please
Yes.
remind me in case I in case I forget. So the political rights issue, I will just rush through it. Political rights depend on again the situation. They involve the courts. They involve elections. They involve civic education. So as a base, again, you have the rights to information when it comes to political rights. So I can start with that base. So one, you have the right to choose a leader of your choice. This is a very contentious right because most of the people use it to their own advantage. But in choosing your leader of your choice, you must also look at the leader who has the most impact. You know, again, if I may use the political rights charters such as the values and principles on public service, democracy and governance, and on local government. These charters actually stipulate the kind of good leader that you need to have. I said good leader in quotes because, again, good is a perception. Some people think dictators are good leaders. Some people don't think dictators are good leaders. So the perception of good depends on your society. But just as a show for it, do they understand your problems? You know, and because you're speaking in terms of the continent, are they for you as citizens of that country? Are they for you as African citizens too? Do they actually want to work with fellow African countries? Do they want to build your country? Do they want to positively change the society? Now, if you do not see this in that leader, you have the right to refuse to pick that person. Now, in refusing to pick that person, usually two of the ways that have been used, I think, in the past 20 years has been one, you vote another person, or two, sorry, you refuse to vote. Now, the problem that arises when you refuse to vote is that you give someone else an opportunity to take the opportunity that you have refused to take. Not to mention various countries. We have seen states where elections have been held and citizens have been very disappointed and have refused to participate in their political duties to their state. And when that happens, you give the people representing you the opportunity to do whatever it is that they want. We have seen certain leaders actually auction parts of their states to non-Africans, and there is nothing that you can do, one, because you refuse to participate in your political duties. Also, we have seen some positive changes in Africa, whereas if I may use my state, we have actually taken these results to court, and we've seen the court a bit diplomatically made this decision that allowed the citizens the opportunity now to rethink their decision. Now, when it comes to political rights, if I may use youth as an example, the youth for the past 20 years have been, so to say, angry about the situation in Africa and have tried to make the various changes, but do not know how. I did have experience with Nigerians. Most of my examples are with Nigerians because they are the most free people, if I may say, and it's easy to talk to them. Who have wanted to make changes in their states and actually vie for political seats, but did not want to do it the normal African way. And so the question was, could I actually vie without being associated to any political party? And the answer is yes. Under the Banjul Charter, when it comes to your political rights, you actually do have the right to vie under independent candidacy. There is the case under the ECOWAS Court of Justice 2016 that actually cemented this fact that it does not matter who you are, and in this case, of course, male, female, PLWD, IDP, you can run for office in independent candidacy. So that was a huge milestone, because everywhere, as opposed to I think East Africa, everywhere in around Africa, youth now have the opportunity to actually solve the situation by themselves without actually waiting for other people to do it. Political rights are usually very complex, very emotional, because it brings out the best and the worst in us. If you look at the African Charter on Local Governance and Local Department, if you actually read through it thoroughly and look at what is not being said, you will understand one is that the country itself is Africa, and the provinces are what we call countries. But then in the specific provinces, we have political rights that are actually being used against you. If I may use the independent candidacy issue and youth taking up offices. We look at youth who are actually being manipulated to do things that are against their country, and that also, if I may digress a bit, that is actually the main issue when it comes to silencing the guns. Who are the most affected and who are the perpetrators of this gun violence? It is us, the youth. And why is it so? One, because we do not know about our political rights. We do not know how to use them positively. And three, we do not understand how to implement them. And so when it comes to topics about political rights, I usually want to ask the question, because it also affects the unity of Africa. Do you know them? One. Do you want to know them? Two. Do you want to implement them? Three. Political rights affect a lot of things, mostly every other right, because if for example, the issue of the African Rehabilitation Institute that deals with PLWDs, and then we have the Kampala Convention on IDPs. Why do we have these charters? Because they are preemptive charters on what happens if there's political instability. Are you going to use your political rights positively to mitigate the situation? If you do use them positively to mitigate the situation, then we have other rights being achieved. For example, the right to life. If there is political stability, you enjoy the right to life. If there's political stability, you enjoy your labor rights. I think I have digressed too much. I've forgotten what I wanted to say. Yes, political rights affect everything. I think I'll start from there before I remember what I wanted to say. You had a question, sir.
Yes, my question was,
Yes.
if you think that the state is either kind of delaying justice or playing in tricks, what can you do as an individual or group of individuals? What can you do?
What can you do to
get justice?
To get justice. Okay. I will start with the individual now, yourself. In this, I think you have achieved one, the first one, and that is civic education. So you have achieved that. Two, usually what happens, what we have implemented here is that there is, if I may use the criminal justice system, you have the right to private prosecution. That means as a citizen, because you're also the government, you have the right to go to this court, depending on the details of the case. So, for example, if it is murder versus theft, it will guide you on what court to go. But either way, as an individual, you actually have the right to go. there and file a case and say, this is what has happened. I have not received any justice, and I'm here to question, now as the second part of the state, that is the police and the judicial system. What are you going to do to protect me and ensure that I achieve justice? So that's the first thing. Second thing, you can do it through your, depending on the institutions in your state. So either through the office of the public prosecution or the ombudsman. So you can go to them and as the way you have done in court and tell them this situation has happened, we have not been receiving any word. Are you going to protect me, or do I have to go the African way to, to protect myself? So there's the second thing. As a group of people, it usually is easier because you have human rights entities, institutions, depending on state to state. And the reason you're going through this human rights institution is because you feel that the state has failed you. So also before you go to the human rights institution, you must also answer the question, has the state failed me? If yes, then you go to the human rights institution. Usually, I think it depends on the state to state. We have some that are specific. So for example, women's rights, children's rights, youth, so to say. So then they will file the case for you. If you look at depending on how your documents are stated. So for example, they can say, if I may use your name, the Sir Prince Foundation, I'm suing this country on behalf of, so there is usually that way. The third way, which is what happens in life, is through social media. That has worked greatly for us. Usually people go on social media, they tweet, and if you have videos, they usually keep that video. So we'll keep pestering you, until you do something about it. And that is a very good example of public participation and implementation of your rights. Because at the end of the day, in as much as you want to blame the people that are representing you, you must realize that you're the government. So if they fail, it is your duty to rectify that situation.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. But then, if say I'm unable to rectify
Okay.
it, do I have the right to take it to an African court, something like that?
Um, I think I can start with asking you, define unable. What is stopping you from?
Let's say I can't get justice from the country because of intrigues.
Okay.
Maybe postponement, over postponement, or some kind of information is given out which is not implemented. I need to go back and keep getting promises, and I feel tired.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So going by what you say, I'll assume that the state has failed you, and also the human rights institutions have failed you. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What has been happening, um, also again subject to how you're going to use it to your advantage. Yes, you can go straight to the economic or the AU courts, but again, in practice, I have not seen the individual, um, so to say, representing themselves. You always have to go through an advocate. However, not all is lost, because there is the Pan-African Lawyers Union, which actually does a lot of the things pro bono. One, you can go through them, or two, and as in Africa, you always have someone somewhere. So you will always have someone somewhere. So in regards to, if it is a state matter, you will always have someone from your state representing your state, either in the Economic Court or the AU Human Rights Court. Um, just as a basis, I have not seen individuals representing themselves in this higher courts. You always have to go through a lawyer. But yes, you do have the right to do that. There have been very many cases, especially in the AU Human Rights Court. I think this year, when it comes to political rights, I think they have finished 3. most of them from West Africa. And then there was also the issue of communication when the state is silencing its people. I think that is currently ongoing to actually, I think, against the state of Tanzania. I think Benin, I'm not sure. But yes, you do have the right to go straight because you are a member of the African Union. So any court is good for you. The issue is usually, have you exhausted your have you exhausted your local dispute resolution mechanisms?
Thank you very
Yes.
much. Yeah, Monica, did I see your hand up? Okay. Yes, Monica, please.
Yeah.
Hi, hi everyone. Hi, Brenda. If I may,
yes.
He asked about if an individual can access the African Court on Human and People's Rights. Just about 6 countries in Africa have I'm forgetting the name. How to endorse that protocol where an individual
rectified.
No, not rectifying. There's another, and after the country rectifies, but then when it gives her citizens the authority to access the court straight, I'm forgetting the legal term. But so an individual cannot still access the court directly. There was an example of Christopher Mtikile, who was a political fugitive in Tanzania, who tried to do an election, rather to stand as an individual candidate, which was not allowed in Tanzania. He tried that, but still they put him down. But finally, somehow his case was heard, and he won the state. So now what they do as an individual, if you are oppressed and you can't be heard in your local legal system, you have to write to the African Human Rights Commission.
Yes.
So it's African Human Rights Commission that is going to forward your case. But also there are some NGOs in each and every country which have been given the status to access the court. So you go through the NGOs. It's a couple of NGOs usually, especially NGOs regarding human rights in every country, either local or international, who are going to represent you to go straight. So an individual can access African Court on Human Rights in 2 ways. One, through the Human Rights Commission or NGOs that have been granted the status of accessing the court. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, because I had not seen. Thank you so much. I think I will write that down. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Any other question, please?
Maybe something I would wish to add, if I'm allowed to.
Yes.
Brenda, is it okay?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. So most of us, we are being told about our human rights, right to education, right to food, right to participating in our political liberations, right to everything we do. But I think most people have not been taught about the obligations and duties they do have towards the right. I think everyone who is listening needs to understand that every right has a duty to it and an obligation to perform to it. So we have seen so many people who are shouting out there on the streets, it's our right, but they also forget that sometimes if your right is infringing my right, then you are not performing the duty and you are not you're not observing the obligation you owe to. So people need to understand that every right that there is, there's a duty and an obligation. I wanted people to understand that too. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, that is actually very important. And people, I've noticed people rarely want to talk about that part for duties. But thank you, thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Has anybody else got a question? PK, do we have questions from YouTube or Facebook? PK? Okay, seems we've got no question from PK. So one thing I would like to, okay, yeah, Monica got a question maybe.
I want to ask a question. Okay. It's very evident that even when some of us, we adhere to the duties and obligations of our rights, that we try to perform upon every right. It's very evident in Africa that most of our institutes, they're not performing, especially when it comes to advocating for rights. Right now, I'll use the example of my country. It's in shackles again, even when most people don't want to admit to it. But everyone has a right to participate in political rebelations or in political participations of what sort. But now today, they are being tear gassed. They go to courts, they are let down. They go to anywhere. Then nobody wants to listen to them. So it's very evident that our leaders, or rather authorities, do not adhere to what actually they're the one who rectify those protocols and statutes. They ratify them into the country, but they don't respect them whatsoever. And it's very disappointing. That's why some people, they just give pip off their shoulders and say, what can we do about this? So what do you think? Us as the youths who actually know, it's also very clear that the majority of the population actually don't know their rights. They're just living at the mercies of those who govern them or rule them, for that matter. So I don't know if there is anything or a sort of a remedy we can come up with that to express our not only political rights, but how can we get the peace we are looking for, or the rights we are looking for that are being infringed heavily, especially in most of our countries today, especially when it comes to political rights, education rights, even social justice rights are heavily being infringed in our countries lately. So I don't know if there's anything we could come up with that many of the youths could be of help, because it's something which is on the rise lately, and I think it needs serious attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wow. I'm trying to figure out a way to answer. If I may say, the problem is usually with us, and by us is everyone. Doesn't matter what your status is in the society. The problem is usually in us, because, for example, let's say the country banana, right? And we have two tribes in that country, so the carrot and the mango. And the mango is being discriminated against, right? So one, they have most of their rights are being infringed. So for example, freedom of association, of movement and whatnot. Now, before we blame the government, we need to ask this other group, what are you doing to protect this group that's being discriminated against? Because in very many African states, we have seen the rise of the notion, so long as it doesn't affect me, I don't care. And that is a very, that fuel, we need to deal with that, because if you keep looking at it as a situation where, so long as it doesn't affect me, I don't care, then these guys who are representing you are going to look at it like, okay, so they are supporting us, so long as this particular citizens are supporting us, we can do everything. And then now we're going to go to the global arena and say, oh, our government is horrible, you know. But before we get to the government, what is happening in the ground, you know? You have talked about education, with civic education, and I think this should serve as an example, maybe to the people who are watching. You have stated the issue with the AU Commission and how to access the AU Human Rights Court. There's a question. There are a few questions that come after it. One, how many people knew that before you stated? You know, now that you've stated it, how many people are going to use that to their advantage? And using it to their advantage, how many people are going to teach their society about what you've said? You know, now in teaching, you solved one problem. People know. Now that we know that we can actually go through the AUC, how many people are going to go through the AUC? That's another thing. Because even if we give them this education and tell them these are your rights, how many are going to implement them? How many want to implement them? Because going back to the thing of it, if it doesn't affect me, I don't care. There's also the notion of, I don't want to look like I'm the one causing commotion. And so we end up accepting whatever is happening and keeping quiet about it. And then when other people see this gap, they're going to come in and bring in democracy. And we know that when they bring in democracy, they're taking over the country. So now when that happens, are you going to say that our government failed us? We are the government. We failed out. Achieving human rights is not as easy as people think it is, because it involves us looking at ourselves. If I may use the issue of economic rights and looking at China, without looking at what is happening in Africa and what they're doing to Africa, if you study them, one of their main decision makers heavily relies on family, because family is where you get your confidence, family is where you get your love, family is where you get your peace, things like that. And so they have this togetherness. And so when it comes to we are doing this, we are all doing this, you know. Now let's come to Africa. How many people are doing this? You're alone. And so it's easy to defeat you. If we can use it as human rights. You stated about the AU Commission. Now, if you are right now to go to your society and tell them, did you know you can actually use the AU? How many will support you? Are you going to achieve that right? You see, it is very complex, because we need to ask, we need to look into ourselves, and most of the people are not ready for that. And I'm not sure if it answered your question though.
Yes. Monica, are you okay? Are you satisfied with the response? Hello, Monica.
Hello.
Monica, are you satisfied with the response?
Is it answered?
Unmute yourself.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We sometimes we have issue of this issue of you say the African courts or African Commission or African courts gives individual the right to stand as independents in their local election. But then, if based on the local electoral laws, some kind of stringent or some kind of difficult to make kind of rules are there. Because I want to take the case of Cameroon. To stand as an independent, you need to fulfill certain conditions, which from the beginning is difficult to fulfill. What do you do in this case?
Conditions like?
Okay, you have to get signatures from 30% of the chiefs, the mayors, the parliamentarians, the senators, from all the regions in the countries. That's from all the regions in the country. of which many of these, say, mayors, parliamentarians, senators, they are all part of the ruling party. None of them is willing to sign for you. Isn't it designed not to achieve the goal of that? So how do you handle this kind of situation?
Wow. How many want to change that? One, because again, just like I stated before, as senior prince, you cannot change that situation as an individual, you know, because then again, in fighting for justice, you know, you're not only fighting for yourself, you're fighting for people like you, you know. Now, do those people want to be fought for? One, if if in that situation, yes, we can see the laws on equity are not being achieved, you know, because then delay actually affects equity. But then even if you as George Prince want to change it, how many want to support you on that? If I may go back to what I may say, it is not as hard to change the situation in Africa. It doesn't matter what that situation is. It's not as hard. The end game is, do you want that change? Are you willing to work for that change? Because yes, I can tell you with the situation, they have infringed on your political rights. They have not achieved the rules on equity, but how many are willing to go for that change? As an individual, you may say, I'll talk about this, but because you're alone, the government will come for you. When they come for you, are people going to fight for you? If no, then you have not done anything. So then in 2 weeks, we'll also come here and someone else will ask that question. What do we do about Cameroon? You know, the end game is usually how many want that change? How many are willing to go for that change? Because even if, as for example, if the African Union, through any of its dockets, come in and say, okay, we are here to fight for Cameroonians and we're going to protect them and things like that, the people representing Cameroon, and that's what we usually call the government, will come in and say we have state sovereignty. Now, because they have used that first defense, as the people, you should come in and see the second defense of, you know, we are actually the government. We voted you in, so you're here to serve us, and not the other way around. Now, the question is, how many Cameroonians will actually see that?
Yeah,
If
but
there
then,
are none,
yeah, must it only be achieved through majority? Can an individual or a group of individuals achieve something which is good? Or must there be majority?
Okay. No, it's okay, continue.
Yeah, because we know that many things have been achieved not by the majority, but by individuals. It's only after when it is achieved that majority comes to join in enjoying the thing. Because if we want to see that until the majority join before we can achieve something, isn't it looking as if democracy is pulling us behind instead of moving us forward? Because we know that people know something that is good, but because they are bright, they choose to vote against what even their consciences know that is the right thing.
The issue of majority is usually, and why, for my part, I'm not sure if other people would agree with that, but my issue for my majority is usually for the implementation purposes. Because as I have seen from the various little changes that we like to make in Africa, yes, as an individual, you may go in and then the AU may support you, and then the courts may say that you don't need to go through all that process. All you need to do is just sign a paper, you'll be on the ballot box. Yes, you have achieved that, but now will it still continue being that way? Because most of the times, what I have seen is that if we were to solve your situation, for example, and we scrap that all out, You know, how many people are going to come in and say, use that specific achievement that you have used? You know, if it was for the youth, you know, and maybe the court says that all you need to do is just your age, your ID, and you'll be at the ballot box. Now you're at the ballot box. How many youth are going to support you, you know, for implementation of whatever it is that you have fought for? And two, how many youth will join you in that fight, you know? And how many youth will join you in that fight? Getting to where you want to go will be easy. Implementation needs the masses, because if you don't have that, then it takes you back to where you are, and so it becomes it brings in the situation of, so what did I do this for? I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. So is there any other person with the question?
Prince, can I go?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone.
There is
yeah,
a question.
I texted you and you forgot to
I
mention it, so I just I'm just gonna go on. It's okay. So my question is that, so with the international level, unless like the government is signatory for the specific protocols on individual complaints, it's not really possible to take it to court, even if they signed that specific convention. Unless the protocol is signed, it just doesn't make any sense. But how does it work with the African Charter or with the African Court?
Yeah, very many situations for this, but personally, I would say you have no right, because they will beat you using that specific defense. You know, we're not party to it, so why are you forcing me to a life that you don't want? So that is personally for me, that is one defense I would use. And if I use that, you actually cannot force me to do that, because I don't ascribe to your life. But then there are other smaller situations, depending on, again, how you would use it. I think I stated this in the first session, I'm not sure. There are those international doctrines when it comes to warlike situations, or when there is political instability. You have the right to protect citizens of that country. So if it is banana citizens who are being treated horribly by their government as the apple, you have the right to go and say, I mean, they're still Africans, even though they don't subscribe to the Banjul Charter, they are still Africans, they're still our brothers and sisters. We will go in and protect them. But then even if you have that way of doing that, you're also violating the culture of the country, and that is intermeddling. So even if you may save the people, and you may let's say give them peace, in future they will come for you and say you meddled in our country and you are not allowed to. So it would just be safe to just stay out of it if they're not part of that. But diplomatically, you can coerce them nicely to join.
Okay.
Yes.
Tiffany, are you okay?
Yeah, that was answered. Thank you.
Okay, Monica, want to ask something? Yes, Monica?
Yeah, usually if you are not, your country has not ratified one of the treaties that is supposed to help you get the justice you want, usually the African Human Rights Commission is your way out. Or an NGO, you need to search it in your country that has been given an observer state, or to protect human rights. Usually the international NGOs in a particular country, they're given observer status. So usually it's your way out if you want to access the court, or you want to access justice, because the commission will take your case, or they will even decide it and find remedies for you especially if you are an individual or you're a group of people who have been infringed, the government is not listening, or you're being streamlined in a certain way. So the commission is your way out, or find an NGO in your various countries that has been given the observer status of AU or human rights, something like that. Because so many countries refuse to ratify the protocols. Most of them are ratified. I don't know why the word, the legal term is where they endorse it. I know it's only like 6 countries in Africa which have accepted that their individuals can wake up and go to African court to sue for anything they are being bothered about. But so many citizens go through NGOs and the commission. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, because of the other activities that we'll be attending later, I think that we'll say thank you to Ms. Brenda and all of you in Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook watching this program. We want to say it was a good day. I learned a lot today. And Ms. Brenda, if it is possible, we'd like you to put everything you've told us here in writing, because you touch a lot of serious points that we would like to share with our members, and so that people can use them to make peace with themselves and also with their governments.
Okay.
You know, and we hope to see you again here on another topic from the law side. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the PLO Lumumba Foundation African Mentorship Program, we'll say once more, see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.